The sharp crack of a fist striking bone echoed through the grand ballroom like a gunshot. Crystal chandeliers trembled above hundreds of New York's most influential guests. Conversations died instantly, as every head turned toward the center of the DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala. Marco Romano, one of Lorenzo DeLuca's youngest and most trusted capos, staggered backward before crashing onto the polished marble floor. Within seconds, dozens of armed bodyguards reached beneath their jackets. Several Mafia captains instinctively rose from their seats. Politicians froze. Billionaires exchanged horrified glances. For one terrifying moment, everyone believed a betrayal had just begun. But Lorenzo never looked at the man lying on the floor. His dark eyes remained fixed on only one person, Emily Carter. The hotel's plus-size event manager stood several feet away, her clipboard still clutched tightly against her chest. Only moments earlier, Marco had smiled warmly and asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Emily had blushed. "Not yet." Marco laughed softly. "Maybe I'd like to change that." 3 seconds later, the most feared Mafia boss in America punched his own trusted capo without saying a single word. No one in the ballroom understood why, least of all Emily. 3 months earlier, Emily Carter had learned long ago that luxury was often least visible to the people who worked hardest to create it. Every morning before sunrise, she walked through the marble lobby of Manhattan's most prestigious hotel, carrying 2 things: a neatly organized planner and an unwavering smile. The planner kept events running flawlessly. The smile kept people from realizing how exhausting it was to be constantly underestimated. At 30 years old, Emily had become the hotel's senior event manager through sheer competence rather than connections. She knew every ballroom measurement by memory, remembered returning guests' preferences without checking notes, and could reorganize a $1 million gala within minutes if disaster struck. Guests praised the hotel's perfection. Few ever learned her name. They thanked the general manager. They complimented the banquet director. They applauded celebrity chefs. But the woman quietly coordinating hundreds of invisible details remained exactly that, invisible. Sometimes she preferred it that way. Sometimes she wished she didn't. Emily, she turned as her assistant hurried toward her. The Harrington wedding just moved their fireworks up by 20 minutes. Emily nodded calmly. Notify catering to serve dessert immediately after the speeches. Move the live quartet to the garden entrance. Tell security to clear the east terrace before sunset. Her assistant blinked. "You figured that out already?" Emily smiled. "I started planning for this possibility yesterday." Within minutes, dozens of employees adjusted seamlessly. Guests never noticed the potential catastrophe. That was the point. Professional success often meant making impossible work appear effortless. Yet later that same afternoon, Emily walked past 2 junior coordinators, whispering near the staff lounge. "I still don't understand how she's in charge." "I know." A quiet laugh followed. "Imagine representing a luxury hotel looking like that." Emily kept walking. She had heard worse. Years earlier, those comments would have ruined her day. Now they simply reminded her that people usually judged appearances long before they noticed ability. She refused to let their opinions determine her worth. Instead, she focused on making sure every employee under her supervision felt respected, even the ones who mocked her when they thought she couldn't hear. Because leadership, she believed, revealed itself most clearly when nobody was watching. Ironically, someone was. Lorenzo DeLuca rarely attended hotel events personally. His executives handled business conferences. His attorneys handled negotiations. His foundation handled charity functions. The fewer people who saw him, the better. Power often grew stronger through distance. Yet over the past several months, the owner of the East Coast's largest Mafia empire had quietly altered his schedule. Whenever possible, meetings found their way to Emily's hotel. Whenever charity committees suggested venues, somehow this ballroom became available. Whenever Lorenzo arrived, he never requested special treatment. He simply observed. Not the decorations, not the speeches. Her. She never knew. She moved constantly through crowded ballrooms, solving problems before anyone recognized they existed. A frightened waiter accidentally spilled expensive champagne on a famous senator. Emily apologized before the young man could lose his job. An elderly guest nearly fainted during an auction. Emily personally escorted her to the medical suite without attracting unwanted attention. A florist delivered the wrong centerpieces. Emily thanked him politely before helping rearrange every table herself. She never raised her voice, never blamed others, never sought praise afterward. Lorenzo noticed every detail. His longtime advisor once asked quietly, "You've attended 5 events here this season." Lorenzo continued watching Emily across the ballroom. "Have I?" His advisor smiled slightly. "You've never cared about floral arrangements before," Lorenzo answered without looking away. "I don't." The conversation ended there. He offered no explanation. He didn't need one. The people closest to Lorenzo understood something unusual was happening. They simply couldn't identify what. Neither could Lorenzo. At least, not yet. Emily's own life remained far less mysterious. Outside work, her apartment was modest. Her evenings were peaceful. Most nights ended with takeout containers, mystery novels, and phone calls with her older sister. Occasionally, her sister encouraged her to start dating again. Emily always laughed. Between 12-hour shifts and emergency wedding disasters, "You deserve someone." Emily looked out her apartment window toward the glittering Manhattan skyline. Maybe someday. She no longer chased romance. Her last relationship had quietly broken something inside her. Her former boyfriend had eventually admitted what she had already suspected. "I care about you," he'd confessed. "But I'm embarrassed introducing you to my friends." Those words had lingered much longer than the relationship itself. Not because she believed them, because she remembered how calmly he had spoken them, as though they were completely reasonable. Since then, Emily had stopped wondering why men overlooked her. She simply accepted that some dreams belonged to other women. Beautiful women, confident women, women who entered rooms and immediately became visible. She concentrated instead on building a life that made her proud. Even if she built it alone, she never imagined that somewhere across the city, one of the most powerful men in America had already begun rearranging his world simply to watch hers. And before long, watching would no longer be enough. If anyone had asked Lorenzo De Luca why he continued attending events he normally delegated to others, he would have answered with the same expressionless calm that intimidated presidents and crime bosses alike. The foundation requires oversight. No one would have questioned him. No one would have guessed the truth. The foundation had become an excuse. Emily Carter was the reason. Over the following weeks, Lorenzo found himself noticing details that most people overlooked. She remembered every employee's birthday. She learned the names of temporary staff after meeting them only once. She thanked janitors with the same sincerity she showed ambassadors. She listened more than she spoke. Most importantly, she never treated powerful people differently simply because they were powerful. One afternoon, Lorenzo arrived nearly an hour before a fundraising luncheon. From the hotel's private mezzanine, hidden behind tinted glass, he quietly observed the ballroom below. Emily was directing a team preparing nearly 300 tables. A nervous young waiter accidentally dropped an entire tray of crystal champagne flutes. The crash echoed through the room. Every conversation stopped. The young man's face turned pale. I'm so sorry." The banquet supervisor stormed toward him. "Do you know how expensive those were?" Before the supervisor could continue, Emily stepped between them. "It wasn't negligence," she said calmly. The floor is still damp from polishing. The supervisor frowned. We're already behind schedule. I'll adjust the timeline. The general manager will blame someone. Emily smiled gently. Then he can blame me. The waiter stared at her in disbelief. After the supervisor walked away, Emily crouched beside the shattered glass. Are you hurt? He shook his head. I'll clean it. You'll help, she corrected with a warm smile. We'll clean it together. Lorenzo watched the entire exchange without moving. His security chief finally broke the silence. She accepted responsibility for someone else's mistake. Lorenzo replied quietly, No. The older man looked confused. She protected someone who didn't have the power to protect himself. There was a difference. Lorenzo understood that difference better than anyone. Emily remained completely unaware that she had become the subject of quiet conversations inside one of the most feared organizations in America. At a weekly strategy meeting inside the DeLuca estate, financial reports were spread across an enormous mahogany table. Capos discussed territory. Lawyers reviewed contracts. Investment directors analyzed international markets. The meeting ended. No one stood. Lorenzo suddenly asked, "The hotel on Lexington." Several executives looked up. "Our foundation gala is scheduled there next month," one answered. Lorenzo nodded. "Keep it there." Another advisor hesitated. "There are less expensive venues." "I didn't ask about expenses." The room immediately fell silent. Marco Romano glanced between the other capos with growing curiosity. This was the third event Lorenzo had insisted on holding at the same hotel. It wasn't like him. Lorenzo was famous for efficiency. He disliked routine. Yet somehow, every important charity event now returned to the same ballroom. Marco wondered why. He never imagined the answer had absolutely nothing to do with business. Meanwhile, life at the hotel continued much as it always had. The admiration of clients rarely erased the cruelty of appearances. During an executive planning meeting, Emily presented a detailed proposal for an international diplomatic banquet. Her presentation was flawless. Every logistical challenge had already been anticipated. When she finished, several department heads nodded appreciatively. Then one marketing executive chuckled. "Emily." She looked toward him. "You really should let someone else greet the foreign delegation." She blinked. "Why?" "We're selling luxury." The room became uncomfortably quiet. He forced a smile. "You know, first impressions." No one defended her. Several colleagues lowered their eyes. Emily inhaled slowly before answering. "My responsibility is ensuring the event succeeds." "It will. I don't believe the success of an international summit depends on the size of the event manager." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the general manager cleared his throat. "Let's move on." The meeting continued. Emily took notes as though nothing had happened. Inside, however, old wounds rarely disappeared completely. They simply became easier to hide. That evening, Emily stopped at a neighborhood grocery store on her way home. Still wearing her work clothes, she carefully compared prices before choosing ingredients for dinner. As she reached for a basket, an elderly woman beside her lost her balance. Without hesitation, Emily caught her before she could fall. "Oh goodness. Are you all right?" "I think so." Emily helped the woman sit on a nearby bench. She called the woman's daughter, waited until she arrived, then quietly left before anyone could thank her. She never noticed the black luxury SUV parked across the street. Inside sat Lorenzo. He had just finished another meeting nearby. He could have driven away. Instead, he watched, not because she had rescued someone, because she expected nothing in return. His driver finally spoke. "Sir?" Lorenzo never took his eyes off the supermarket entrance. "Do you know what fear usually makes people do?" The driver thought for a moment. "They protect themselves." Lorenzo nodded. "She protects strangers." That answer lingered in the silent vehicle all the way back to the estate. Days later, invitations were finalized for the DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala, the city's most anticipated philanthropic event of the season. Politicians, judges, corporate giants, international investors, celebrities. Every influential family in New York would attend. For Emily, it represented months of preparation. For Lorenzo, it represented an opportunity. Not because he intended to reveal anything. Quite the opposite. He had become strangely content, simply existing at the edge of her world, watching her succeed, watching her smile. Watching a woman everyone underestimated quietly become the strongest person in every room she entered. He told himself that was enough. Fate had other plans. As the final guest list was distributed among the DeLuca organization, Marco Romano glanced over the schedule and smiled. So this is the famous hotel Lorenzo keeps choosing. One of the older capos laughed. They say the event manager performs miracles. Marco folded the invitation into his jacket. Then I suppose I should introduce myself. Miles away, Emily reviewed seating charts late into the night, completely unaware that a simple conversation, waiting just a few days ahead, would ignite rumors powerful enough to shake New York's elite and force the most disciplined mafia boss in America to lose control for the very first time. The DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala began precisely at 7 o'clock. By 6:30, the ballroom had already become the center of New York's most exclusive gathering. Black luxury sedans lined the entrance. International CEOs stepped onto the red carpet beside Hollywood celebrities. Federal judges exchanged handshakes with senators. Old money families mingled effortlessly with technology billionaires. Every crystal glass sparkled beneath handcrafted Italian chandeliers. Every flower arrangement had been positioned to the millimeter. Every guest believed perfection happened naturally. Only the hotel staff knew perfection had a name. Emily Carter. She stood near the ballroom entrance, headset resting discreetly beneath her neatly styled hair, calmly directing more than 80 employees through the evening's final preparations. Table 14 needs another vegetarian menu. Move the photographers 5 feet left before the foundation president arrives. The orchestra begins exactly 30 seconds after Mr. DeLuca enters. Each instruction was quiet. Each was precise. No panic. No wasted movement. Guests noticed elegance. Emily noticed everything else. Outside, a convoy of black vehicles rolled to a smooth stop. Within seconds, Lorenzo DeLuca stepped onto the red carpet. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Even before anyone spoke his name, people instinctively straightened their posture. Politicians interrupted conversations. Corporate executives lowered their voices. Several rival businessmen quietly stepped aside. Power rarely announced itself. It simply entered the room. Lorenzo acknowledged the welcoming committee with a polite nod before walking into the ballroom. His expression remained composed. His pace never hurried. To everyone else, he appeared focused on the evening's charitable mission. Only Lorenzo knew. His eyes had already begun searching the room. He found Emily within seconds. She was helping an elderly donor adjust her wheelchair before personally escorting her to the front row. No photographers surrounded them. No cameras captured the moment. Emily never realized Lorenzo had watched the entire exchange. Again, boss. Marco Romano approached with his usual confident smile. The room looks incredible. Lorenzo answered without taking his eyes off the ballroom. It does. Marco followed his gaze until he noticed Emily speaking with several hotel employees. The event manager? Lorenzo remained silent. Marco smiled. I've heard about her. What have you heard? They say she's the reason this hotel never makes mistakes. Lorenzo finally looked at him. They're correct. Marco chuckled. I didn't expect such a direct compliment. Neither did the men standing nearby. Lorenzo rarely praised anyone, especially someone completely outside his organization. Marco filed the observation away, without another thought. The gala unfolded flawlessly. A record-breaking auction raised millions for children's hospitals. Musicians performed between speeches. Business leaders pledged enormous donations. Throughout the evening, Emily quietly solved dozens of problems before anyone else noticed them. A delayed dessert service, a missing interpreter, a last-minute seating conflict between two political rivals. Each crisis disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. Marco happened to witness several of them. After watching Emily calmly diffuse an argument between two demanding donors, he laughed softly to himself. She's impressive. Unlike many people attracted by appearances, Marco admired competence. He decided she deserved to hear it. Later that evening, Emily finally allowed herself a short break near the ballroom's outdoor terrace. The city lights shimmered across Manhattan like scattered diamonds. For the first time all night, she exhaled. "Mind if I join you?" She turned. Marco Romano stood beside her, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I thought you might prefer this over champagne." Emily accepted the glass with a grateful smile. "Thank you." "I've been watching you all evening." She laughed awkwardly. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." He leaned casually against the balcony railing. "I've attended events all over the world. I've never seen someone solve so many disasters without anyone realizing disasters even happened." Emily shrugged. If guests noticed the problems, then the event manager failed. She smiled. "Exactly." Marco found himself laughing. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. They talked about long workdays, favorite restaurants, the strange habits of wealthy guests, the pressure of managing impossible expectations. For nearly 20 minutes, Emily forgot she was speaking with one of the most influential men in the city. She simply enjoyed talking to someone who saw her work instead of her appearance. Across the ballroom, Lorenzo noticed. He said nothing, but he watched every smile, every laugh, every passing minute. His advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Something had changed. The boss hadn't looked away once. Marco checked his watch. "I should probably stop stealing the hotel's best event manager." Emily smiled. "I should probably return before someone starts another emergency." He hesitated, then asked with genuine curiosity, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you have a boyfriend?" Emily looked briefly surprised. Then a shy smile appeared. "Not yet." Marco smiled back. "Really?" She nodded. "I've been a little too busy building my career." He laughed warmly. "The lucky guy is taking far too long." Emily looked down, slightly embarrassed. Marco took a quiet breath before speaking again. "Maybe," he paused, "I'd like to change that." For a single heartbeat, everything stood still. Emily blinked. She hadn't expected the conversation to become personal. Before she could answer, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Marco." Both of them turned. Lorenzo stood only a few feet away. His face revealed nothing. His dark eyes remained unreadable. Marco smiled naturally. "Boss, I was just..." He never finished the sentence. Without warning, Lorenzo's fist exploded forward. Crack! The impact echoed across the terrace and into the ballroom. Marco stumbled backward, crashing into a marble column before collapsing onto the polished floor. Emily gasped. The sparkling water slipped from her hand and shattered beside them. Inside the ballroom, music stopped instantly. Bodyguards reached beneath their jackets. Dozens of armed men rushed toward the terrace. Several Mafia captains instinctively surrounded Lorenzo, believing an assassination attempt had begun. Politicians froze in confusion. Guests stared in absolute disbelief. No one moved. No one breathed. Marco slowly touched his bleeding lip, unable to understand what had happened. He looked up at the man he had followed for years. "Boss." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "What did I do?" Lorenzo stood perfectly still. His breathing remained controlled. His hands relaxed once more at his sides. Yet the silence surrounding him felt more terrifying than any shouted threat. Emily looked from Marco to Lorenzo, completely unable to comprehend why the calmest, most disciplined mafia boss in America had just struck one of his most loyal capos. And as whispers began spreading through the stunned crowd, one impossible question passed from guest to guest. What kind of woman could make Lorenzo De Luca lose control? By sunrise, the entire city had its own version of what had happened. None of them were true. Yet every story spread faster than the truth ever could. The headlines never mentioned the millions raised for children's hospitals. They ignored the foundation's record-breaking success. Instead, social media feeds, gossip columns, and private conversations all revolved around a single question. Why had Lorenzo De Luca punched one of his own capos over an unknown hotel employee? Within hours, Emily Carter's name had become the most discussed topic among New York's elite. Unfortunately, very few people discussed her with kindness. At a fashionable brunch on the Upper East Side, several prominent socialites laughed over expensive coffee. "I saw the video. So did I." One woman rolled her eyes dramatically. "I suppose every billionaire eventually has a midlife crisis." Another smirked. "Please." She knew exactly what she was doing. "You don't accidentally get the attention of Lorenzo De Luca." Someone else added, "Maybe she's smarter than she looks." The table erupted with quiet laughter. Not one of them had ever spoken to Emily. Not one knew anything about her character. Still, they felt completely qualified to judge her. Emily heard the whispers before she even reached her office Monday morning. Conversations stopped as she entered elevators. Employees suddenly found reasons to leave the break room. Several co-workers stared at her with open curiosity, others with obvious jealousy. One receptionist finally approached. "I just wanted to say," Emily looked up hopefully, "I never expected you to be that ambitious." Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" The young woman smiled awkwardly. "Nothing." It was a compliment. It wasn't. Emily understood that immediately. Later that afternoon, the hotel's executive committee called an emergency meeting. The atmosphere felt unusually tense. The general manager folded his hands across the conference table. "Emily." He cleared his throat. "The board has concerns." She sat quietly. "What kind of concerns?" "Our hotel's reputation." Emily waited. One executive spoke carefully. "Some clients believe your relationship with Mr. De Luca could create complications." Emily looked genuinely confused. "There is no relationship." Another executive sighed. "Public perception doesn't always require facts." She stared at them in disbelief. "I've worked here for 8 years. I've never received a disciplinary warning. I've never failed an event." The room remained silent. Finally, the general manager spoke. "We know, but perhaps," he hesitated, "you should avoid direct contact with Mr. De Luca during future events." Emily slowly nodded. "I understand." She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply gathered her notebook and quietly left the room. Only after the elevator doors closed did she allow herself to lean against the wall. For the first time in years, work no longer felt like the place where she belonged. Across the city, Lorenzo received a very different report. Inside his private office, his intelligence director placed a slim folder on the desk. "The rumors are escalating." Lorenzo opened it. Photographs, news articles, anonymous online posts. Private comments collected from influential circles. Every page carried Emily's name. Every page questioned her integrity. He finished reading without changing expression, then quietly asked, "Who started them?" The room became still. His security chief answered carefully, "No single source. It spread naturally after the incident." Lorenzo closed the folder. "What about the hotel?" "They're distancing themselves." A long silence followed. Finally, Lorenzo stood. "Handle it." His advisors understood exactly what that meant. Protect her, without revealing why. The first attempt came 3 days later. A wealthy investor suddenly threatened to cancel a multi-million-dollar charity banquet, insisting Emily should not oversee the event. Before hotel management could respond, the investor received an unexpected phone call. No one knew who made it. 10 minutes later, he called back. His attitude had completely changed. "There has been a misunderstanding. We're delighted to continue." The event remained exactly as scheduled. Emily never learned why. The second incident happened the following week. An anonymous online article falsely accused Emily of using wealthy clients to advance her career. Within 2 hours, the website disappeared. Its publisher issued a public apology. Every copy vanished from the internet almost overnight. Emily assumed the lawyers had acted quickly. In reality, the publisher had been visited by men who never raised their voices. They simply explained that lies carried expensive consequences. The third incident frightened Lorenzo the most. Late one rainy evening, Emily left the hotel long after midnight. The streets were nearly empty. Halfway to the subway entrance, 2 intoxicated men recognized her from the viral videos. "So that's her, the woman who trapped DeLuca." One stepped into her path. "You don't look so special." Emily attempted to walk around them. "Excuse me." The second man laughed. "Maybe you should teach our friend how to become a billionaire's girlfriend." Before either man could move closer, headlights swept across the sidewalk. A black SUV stopped beside them. The rear door opened. 4 impeccably dressed men stepped onto the pavement. No weapons were visible. None were necessary. One bodyguard calmly looked at the 2 men. "I believe the lady wishes to continue home." Something in his voice erased every trace of drunken confidence. Within seconds, both men disappeared into the night without another word. The bodyguards turned toward Emily. "The weather is unpleasant. Our employer asked us to ensure you arrive home safely." Emily blinked. "My employer?" The oldest guard offered a polite smile. "No." He opened the car door. "A gentleman who prefers not to be thanked." Emily hesitated. She already knew. Only one man possessed that kind of quiet influence. She looked toward the darkened front window of the SUV. The glass concealed whoever sat inside. She whispered almost to herself, "Mr. DeLuca." No answer came. The vehicle simply waited. After a long moment, Emily climbed inside. The ride lasted 20 minutes. Not a single word was spoken. When they reached her apartment building, the rear door opened automatically. Emily stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned back toward the vehicle. "Please." She spoke softly. "If you see him, tell him thank you." The tinted window never lowered. The SUV drove away into the rain. Only after it disappeared around the corner did the rear passenger finally speak. Lorenzo had heard every word. He looked out at the empty street for several silent seconds before saying quietly, "I don't want gratitude." His longtime advisor glanced toward him. "What do you want?" Lorenzo answered with unusual honesty. "I want her to stop paying for my mistake." For the first time since striking Marco Romano, Lorenzo admitted to himself that the greatest danger Emily faced had never come from his enemies. It had come from his inability to control a single moment of jealousy. And if he truly intended to protect the woman he admired, remaining in the shadows would soon no longer be enough. The following Monday, Emily arrived at work, determined to pretend nothing had changed. It was easier that way. If she focused on schedules, guest lists, and impossible deadlines, she didn't have to think about viral videos, whispered conversations, or the mysterious man whose single moment of anger had turned her quiet life upside down. Unfortunately, the world refused to move on as quickly as she did. Everywhere she walked, people looked twice. Some with curiosity, some with envy, others with open suspicion. She answered every question politely. She performed every responsibility flawlessly. Yet the loneliness she had buried years ago slowly began returning. Not because strangers judged her, because this time they questioned her integrity. That hurt far more than insults about her appearance ever had. Late that afternoon, the hotel's concierge approached her office. "Ms. Carter?" "Yes?" "A private guest has requested a meeting." Emily frowned. "I don't have any appointments." He insisted he would wait. She walked toward one of the hotel's smaller executive lounges. The moment she opened the door, she stopped. Lorenzo De Luca stood beside the window, overlooking Manhattan. No bodyguards entered with him. No advisors. Just him. He turned as she entered. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lorenzo broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Emily blinked. Of all the things she expected him to say, those words were not among them. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind it. "My actions caused consequences you did not deserve." Emily folded her hands together. "I still don't understand why you did it." Neither did he. Not completely. He had spent countless sleepless nights trying to explain to himself how a man who had negotiated peace between rival crime families without raising his voice had lost control in 3 impossible seconds. He looked directly into her eyes. "I cannot justify what happened. I can only tell you that I regret the burden it placed on you." Emily searched his face. There was no arrogance. No attempt to excuse himself. Only genuine remorse. "I appreciate the apology," she said softly. "But it doesn't change anything." "I know." Another silence settled between them. It was uncomfortable, yet strangely honest. Over the next several weeks, their paths crossed more frequently, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes not entirely. Lorenzo never interrupted her work. He never demanded her attention. If she was busy, he simply waited. If she declined an invitation for coffee because of meetings, he accepted her answer without disappointment. For the first time in Emily's life, she met a powerful man who never expected the world to rearrange itself around him. One rainy evening, after another charity planning session, they found themselves walking through the hotel's quiet rooftop garden. The city lights shimmered beneath the clouds. Emily glanced sideways. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask anything." "Are you always this calm?" A faint smile appeared. "Usually." "Usually?" "I failed once." She laughed quietly. "I noticed." To her surprise, he laughed too. It was brief, warm, unexpectedly human. The sound erased years of terrifying stories she had heard about him. For the first time, she stopped seeing the Mafia boss. She simply saw Lorenzo. Their conversations gradually became longer. He asked about her childhood. She learned he had lost his father while still young. He asked why she worked such impossible hours. She admitted she genuinely loved creating memorable moments for people. He listened. Really listened, never checking his phone, never interrupting, never treating her thoughts as less important than his own. One evening, she finally asked the question everyone else feared. "Are the stories about you true?" He considered the question carefully. "Some are. And the rest? They become more dramatic every time they're repeated." She smiled. I suspected that. He looked at her curiously. Why? Because monsters rarely apologize. The words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. No one had ever described him that way before. Not because they admired him, because they feared him too much to look beyond his reputation. Emily had done something extraordinary. She judged him by his actions in front of her, not by the stories surrounding him. Weeks passed. Without realizing it, Emily began noticing small gestures. Every time they met, Lorenzo remembered details she had mentioned months earlier. Her favorite tea, the novel she was reading, the charity supporting children with disabilities, the anniversary of her promotion. He never mentioned expensive gifts, never tried to impress her with wealth. Instead, he paid attention. And Emily slowly realized something else. Whenever Lorenzo entered a room filled with powerful people, they all competed for his attention. He ignored nearly all of them. Yet when she spoke, he never looked anywhere else. One Saturday morning, Lorenzo invited her to visit one of the Foundation's children's hospitals. Emily accepted, assuming it would be another formal charity appearance. She was wrong. There were no cameras, no reporters, no speeches, only children receiving long-term treatment. The moment they entered the pediatric ward, several children shouted happily, "Lorenzo!" He smiled in a way Emily had never witnessed before. Completely unguarded. One little girl in a wheelchair reached toward him. "You promised chess. I remember. You said last week. I know. You were late." He pretended to sigh dramatically. "I was defeated before the game even started." The little girl giggled. Emily watched as Lorenzo spent nearly 2 hours playing games, reading stories, and quietly encouraging frightened families. No photographers documented any of it. No newspapers would ever know. When they finally left the hospital, Emily remained unusually quiet. "What are you thinking?" Lorenzo asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "The world only knows the man people fear." "And?" "I met the man children run toward." Lorenzo lowered his eyes briefly. "That man exists because the other one must." Emily did not fully understand his answer, but she understood the sadness behind it. That evening, they stopped beside the East River before returning home. The breeze carried the scent of rain across the water. Emily rested her hands on the railing. "I've been unfair to you." Lorenzo turned toward her. "You had every reason to be. I assumed the man everyone described was the real you. And now?" She smiled softly. "I think the real Lorenzo is much quieter than his reputation." For the first time in many years, someone had seen him. Not the empire, not the influence, not the fear. Him. Lorenzo looked across the river before speaking almost in a whisper. "Do you know what first caught my attention?" Emily laughed. "My emergency seating charts? No. My event schedules? No." She tilted her head. "Then what?" His gaze met hers. "You were surrounded by people who judged you every day. You never allowed them to change the way you treated anyone else." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. "I admired your integrity, long before I noticed anything else." Neither of them spoke after that. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine something she had refused to consider since her last heartbreak. Perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible distance between their two worlds was not as impossible as she had always believed. Neither of them realized that someone else had already decided to destroy that hope. And the next public gala would force both of them to confront a truth neither could hide any longer. 3 months after the infamous punch, the DeLuca Foundation announced another charity gala. Once again, New York's most influential people gathered beneath glittering chandeliers. Once again, Emily Carter stood behind the scenes, ensuring every detail unfolded flawlessly. And once again, The whispers followed her wherever she walked. There she is. She certainly climbed the social ladder quickly. I wonder how much influence she's gained. Emily had learned not to respond. Dignity required no audience. She simply continued working. The evening progressed smoothly until the foundation president invited several major donors onto the stage to recognize their contributions. As guests applauded, one prominent businesswoman requested the microphone. She smiled politely. "Before we continue, I believe many of us are wondering about something." The ballroom grew quieter. She turned toward Emily. "Miss Carter, you've become remarkably close to Mr. DeLuca." Several guests exchanged knowing smiles. The woman continued. "Many talented professionals work in this city. Yet somehow, after one very public incident, your career seems more secure than ever." The implication hung heavily in the air. Emily slowly walked toward the stage. She accepted the microphone with steady hands. "My career has not changed." The woman smiled sweetly. "Perhaps not officially, but influence comes in many forms." Another voice joined in. "Did Mr. DeLuca arrange your recent contracts?" A third guest added, "Did he pressure the hotel to protect your position?" More murmurs filled the ballroom. Emily looked across the crowd. Faces she had served for years. People whose events she had rescued countless times. People who had praised her professionalism. Now, they questioned everything she had ever achieved. Not because she had failed, because they could not imagine a woman like her earning respect honestly. Emily inhaled slowly. "If my work has disappointed anyone," she began quietly, "then I accept responsibility. But I have never asked Mr. DeLuca for favors. I have never requested influence. I have never accepted special treatment." Her words disappeared beneath skeptical expressions. The accusations continued. Someone laughed. Another guest whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Everyone says that." Emily realized something painful. No explanation would ever satisfy people who had already decided she was guilty. She lowered the microphone. Perhaps silence was the only dignity she still possessed. Then, a familiar voice echoed through the ballroom. "That will be enough." The room froze. Lorenzo DeLuca walked toward the stage. Not hurriedly, not angrily. With the same calm authority that had made countless powerful people fear disappointing him. No one interrupted. He stepped beside Emily. Not in front of her, beside her. An almost invisible gesture. Yet everyone understood its meaning. They were equals. Lorenzo accepted the microphone. "I have listened long enough." His voice never rose. It never needed to. "You question Miss Carter's integrity." He looked across the ballroom. "Allow me to tell you something none of you know." Absolute silence. 6 months ago, my financial office received an anonymous proposal. It involved redirecting foundation donations through a series of luxury events. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Lorenzo continued. The arrangement appeared legal. It was not. It was an international laundering operation. Gasps spread across the room. The individuals responsible approached this hotel. They offered generous incentives. They expected cooperation. Emily stared at him. She had never heard this story. Lorenzo turned toward her. "You remember a consultant asking you to alter vendor records?" Emily's eyes widened. "Yes. I refused." "You also reported the irregularities to your finance department." "I thought someone had made a bookkeeping mistake." "You prevented a criminal network from entering my foundation." The ballroom became perfectly silent. Lorenzo looked back toward the audience. She had no idea my organization was connected. She did not know powerful people were involved. She received no reward, no recognition. She simply refused to compromise her principles. He paused. That decision cost the criminals millions. It earned my respect. One elderly judge slowly stood. You mean, you admired her before the incident with Marco? Lorenzo answered without hesitation. Long before. I watched her protect employees. I watched her accept blame she did not deserve. I watched her treat janitors with the same respect she offered billionaires. I watched her reject corruption without realizing anyone important would ever know. His eyes moved toward Emily. I respected her character. I later fell in love with the woman who possessed it. No one spoke. Not a single person. The same ballroom that had once mocked Emily now stared at her with stunned disbelief. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had mistaken humility for ambition. Most painfully, they had mistaken invisibility for worthlessness. A chair scraped quietly across the floor. Marco Romano stood. The faint scar near his cheek had long since healed. He walked slowly toward the stage. Stopping before Emily, he bowed his head. I owe you an apology. Emily looked surprised. I unintentionally placed you in the center of a storm. My question started rumors you never deserved. He turned toward Lorenzo. And boss. A faint smile crossed his face. I suppose I should also apologize for accidentally discovering you were jealous. Soft laughter rippled across the ballroom. Even Lorenzo allowed himself the smallest smile. Marco looked back at Emily. If I'd known he had been secretly watching you for months, I never would have interrupted. The tension dissolved. Not completely, but enough for people to breathe again. The hotel's general manager approached next. His expression carried genuine regret. Miss Carter, I should have trusted the woman whose integrity had already built this hotel's reputation. He extended his hand. I hope you'll forgive my lack of courage. Emily shook it gently. There is nothing to forgive. That answer affected him more deeply than any accusation could have. Because grace often embarrassed people more than anger. Lorenzo turned once more toward the audience. For years, you overlooked an extraordinary woman. Not because she lacked value, but because you measured value with the wrong standards. He reached for Emily's hand. This time, she accepted it. Not because of his power, not because of the crowd, because she finally understood why he had chosen her. It had never been pity, never impulse, never rebellion against society's expectations. He had seen her long before anyone else had bothered to look. Lorenzo faced the ballroom. I would like to introduce you to the woman I respect above every person in this room. A brief pause. And the woman I love. The applause began quietly. Then grew. Soon the entire ballroom stood. People who had once ignored Emily now applauded, not because she stood beside the city's most powerful man, but because they finally understood she had deserved recognition all along. Later that evening, after the final guests departed, Emily and Lorenzo stood alone on the ballroom terrace overlooking Manhattan. The same skyline, the same lights, yet everything had changed. Emily looked at the empty ballroom behind them. You know, I spent years believing people couldn't see me. Lorenzo gently squeezed her hand. They saw you. They simply never looked deeply enough. She smiled. And you did. I started with your character. He smiled back. The rest was inevitable. Emily laughed through grateful tears. For the first time in her life, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel underestimated. She did not need to prove that she belonged, because the man who commanded the loyalty of an empire had chosen her for the one thing no amount of money, beauty, or influence could ever purchase. An unshakable heart. And standing beside Lorenzo De Luca, Emily Carter finally understood the truth that had always been waiting for her. Real love does not rescue someone from being ordinary. It recognizes the extraordinary person they have quietly been all along.